Hello, and as always, a very warm welcome to Ruda Talks Change, where I ask a person who has had a life full of eventfulness about the change moments, the moments of decision, the moments when you make a decision or when life makes a decision for you, how you deal with it, how you go through it, what you do with change in your life. And today, our guest is the CEO of Grit Real Estate Income Group, listed in London and Mauritius, focused on real estate outside South Africa. They own and operate offices and malls and warehouses, and I don't know what else, from Morocco to Ghana to Mozambique to Mauritius. Bronwyn Knight, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Ruda. Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great to chat to you.
I've loved getting to know your story a little bit because it really is, the change moments are amazing. I want to go back right to the beginning. Your parents couldn't afford to send you to university after you finished school, and you worked and studied. What made you go that extra mile? Was it ever an option not to study?
Yeah, so I think, Ruda, and I think the concept of change and what you have here is definitively defines my life. Even from a young age, that I wasn't given the opportunities that a lot of people would have been given. I came from very humble beginnings, very humble, hardworking parents that just really couldn't make ends meet. So the opportunity to go to university never presented itself to me. And I knew that if I was going to go to university and looking at my mom, and she worked her entire life as a receptionist, and she was in a difficult relationship with my dad and couldn't leave because of money. So I never wanted to be a woman that was put in a position like that. I wanted to always be self-sustainable, and to do that, I had to then really go and use a bit of the network, because my mother was a receptionist in an auditing firm, to use that network to be able to go and ask them for an opportunity to work straight out of school, which meant that I started articles straight out of school. And I was the last non-degree person that they accepted because the rules then changed, which meant that I had to do my university degree whilst doing my articles at the same time. And I have always had an unbelievable work ethic, but that really bolstered the work ethic that I had, because ultimately it was work by day, study by night, study on the weekends, and that is what I had to do. And I had to pay for my own studies and everything from right from the beginning, actually.
Why did you choose auditing, or was it just that was the one door you could see that was slightly open?
So it was interesting because my mother was actually a receptionist in Ernst & Young for like 25 years. She used to take me after school and I used to sit there. So I had accountants surrounding me from a young age. But I always knew that I wanted to run my own business. I always knew that I wanted to be in something that was going to pioneer. I always said if I sold shoes or did anything, I wanted to be in something that was going to be extremely dynamic and something that I could pioneer. And at that stage, I got really good advice from the audit partner at my mom's firm to say, as a chartered accountant, once you have that base, you can do anything thereafter, which means that whether you want to start your own business, whether you want to go into marketing, sales, whatever it means, become a chartered accountant, and then you can go from there. And that was the best advice that I could have ever received. And it's still advice I give to people today, to say, that's one thing you can do, because it just gives you such an exposure to different businesses, exposure to different practices, even from law to accounting to everything. And then you can go from there. So that's ultimately why route I did.
Very broad base, a foundation on which you can build anything. You're saying about, that someone gave you that advice. We've done a few of these interviews this week, and it so strikes me how important a mentor can be at the right moment, or just someone to give you some small input to a young person.
And really, I believe that, because I've got absolute pearls along the way. And I think one, as an individual, you should be receptive to those. So, we all need to start to listen more and not talk as much, I always say. And I do love talking, but, we need to listen more. And there are amazing people out there. And even myself personally, I try and share as much as I can, from personal experiences, to business experiences. I've mentioned to you earlier that I've recently gone through a divorce. I try and share so much, because I think the more we can share, the more guidance we can give others, the more opportunity we can create for them. And that is absolutely key, because it's actually my foundation where I am today. It was because of those mentors along the way.
You have said that your move into property was caused by 2 years in a basement. Tell me that story.
So it was crazy. So I was working for an auditing firm in Johannesburg, and I got involved with a client, a property client, a real estate client. And interesting enough, they did everything. So they did construction, they did property management, facilities management, acquisitions, and they hadn't submitted any documents to the South African receiver office for 22 years or something. So SARS was after them. And they employed our auditing firm to actually reconstruct everything. So literally I sat in a basement for 2 years of my life. And I reconstructed this entire business, which was an entrepreneurial business, did great at property, but terrible administration. And I reconstructed their books. And that's where I learned about property. And that was my base. And again, because they were exposed to all facets of property and real estate, I was able to get a complete exposure. And I always say how I fell into property and real estate, but ultimately that's how I was. And that's my 2 years I spent in a basement, literally constructing their real estate.
And when you were with the Delta Property Fund, you wanted to move into international property. And you, with a partner, decided Africa rather than Europe. I think many South African REITs companies were then looking at Eastern Europe, but you decided no, you were going into Africa. Why?
So, I think people to this day probably thought I was quite insane, my partner and I, at that stage. Because, I think South Africans often forget they're part of the African continent. And they often forget that there's this diverse continent, which they're part of. And, I believe that, the amount of opportunity, and because they were such emerging markets, they were only at the beginning of so many cycles, that the opportunity to do something pioneering would be amazing, because ultimately you had all the SA REITs going into Eastern Europe, they're going into the UK. Everybody was doing much of the same thing. And in South Africans, we love to compete against each other. We like to always try and do the thing. And the nice thing about Africa, outside of South Africa, is that it's very relationship driven. And the fact of the matter is, what we have done in South Africa and what we've done from a commercial perspective, we are so advanced from a financial services perspective in a lot of these countries in Africa. So the ability to take what we know and the ability to pioneer it into these markets, not just on real estate, but on capital markets too. So I ventured into Morocco. No South African business had actually invested into Morocco. And I suppose even going into Nigeria at the time, one of our key investors, which one of the pension funds, he looked at me and he said, Bronwyn, have you looked at yourself? You're a blonde-haired woman, you're white. How do you go into Nigeria and drink beer with the African men? That was his biggest concern, and I still chuckle with him today, actually. And we took the bold decision. We didn't come out of one of the big boys, one of the big REITs of South Africa, but we took a bold decision to go onto the African continent. And again, it hasn't been an easy road, but it's been an unbelievable road. And it's absolutely by those monumentous times and changes and decisions and things that you have to do, which has created an absolutely unbelievable trajectory and road and journey for the African continent, which is amazing.
What is the answer to what your friend was asking you? Here you are, barely 30, white South African girl, and you venture into, Morocco first, and then. How did you get to know those markets? Because if you want to buy a strip mall in Senegal with someone else's money, you'd better know what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it was a couple of factors at that time. One was I personally, with a very niche team, spent a lot of time in these countries. And it wasn't just time spent, it was respect for finding a local partner. So, one of the key successes to our business is really finding people that are localized to the market, and actually creating our business around localization into these markets. So We haven't done anything. I mean, we are now invested in 8 African countries outside of South Africa. We haven't done anything without a local partner. And finding a partner is also not the easiest thing, as you can imagine. And, I look at the years of, attending weddings, funerals, literally going back and forth to Ghana, to Nigeria, to ultimately find those partners. But the fact of the matter is you can't go there with an arrogance. You can't go there thinking you can do things better than they can. Real estate is a very emotional commodity across the African continent because it's often held in families for years and years, and it's often passed on in families. So when you're buying real estate, what we've done on a lot of our transactions is we've actually often kept the family in the transaction. So they are still our partners today. So we will JV these transactions. And it's the respect of those relationships and partnerships, which I think has been our success. And we're very much on the ground across Africa. And, again, you just have to humble yourself. That's one thing I have the ability to do. And I'm not going to say it's because I'm a woman. I'm able to leave my ego at the door. I suppose we all have an ego of some sort. But the thing is, I didn't come from much. So, I didn't have to go there with this massive ego. I went there to learn. And I learn every day. And I still learn every day. And I always say, in my lifetime, I will continue learning in some of these markets that we operate in.
But when you say going to weddings and funerals, etc., what strikes me is you were building relationships even before there was a business coming together.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. I still chuckle on some of the transactions and deals that we've done. It might have taken us 3-4 years to close a transaction. And a lot of people don't have patience either. I think a lot of it sort of people in business want the quick wins, the quick fixes. One, it's easier to follow other people. And secondly, it's that it takes time. It takes relationships. It takes trust. We have a board member that sits on our board now, Sir Sam Jonah, one of the most influential businessmen of West Africa. He started Ashanti Gold. I've known Sam for years. I think it took him about 5 years to sell us a part of his real estate. He now sits on our board, and we're very honored to have him there. So I think, again, the whole heart of our business, Grit, is completely relationship driven.
Bronwyn, I don't know exactly where it fell out, but you were talking about your West African colleague. Can you go back to that? Do you remember your thought?
No, I was just sharing with you one of our board members, Sir Sam Jonah, who is a very astute West African businessman, started Ashanti Gold, and had quite a large real estate portfolio. And the significance of building a relationship with him, even prior to actually transacting on a real estate deal, took us about 5 years in the making. And we're actually very honored that he came onto the Grit board, part of the London listing, actually. And very astute, actually also a mentor to myself, and has been for a number of years. So, for Africa and for emerging markets and the success, as I mentioned, it's been so relationship driven, as part of who we are.
And your experience as a woman in a very male dominated world, both property, three things: property, African business, and then business in general.
Yeah, so it is interesting because, there's a number of firsts. If you look at even the South African REIT market, I think we have, out of 40 odd REITs, 2 female CEOs. We listed in London. I am, and hopefully won't be the last, but female-led African business to list in London. The more sort of we go across even developed markets like the UK, you realize actually that this gender gap is so large still. So it's been an interesting journey for me. And I try and lead from the front. So if you look at our board, we've got predominantly a very large number of female board members. My business, more than half of my staff are women. And the fact of the matter is, it's been interesting. Often I will sit at a table and I could be in Ghana, I could be in Nigeria, I could be in Morocco, and I'll look around me and there'll be 20 people in a room and I'll be the only woman. And I often have to look around and say, geez, I'm not the only woman. So it's been interesting, but for me, I've just sort of pioneered and moved forward, and definitively have tried to promote women internally through the business, even through, I've started an initiation in Mauritius called Women in Grit, It's the only female association actually in Mauritius, business association. So, for me, it's to actually see the opportunity, not what is lost. Is to actually see the opportunity.
Yes.
But it has been interesting. And I think a lot of the men, across where I deal with in the markets, when I arrived in Mauritius 5 years ago, I joined an organization called YPO. I was their first female member. They've got 100 members. And the head of YPO, and he's a very dear man, said to me, Bronwyn, what do we do with you now? Do we put you with the spouses? And I did laugh at him. So, I think a lot of people don't know what to do with me, but I try and sort of keep it very lighthearted and everything and make them comfortable. Because once they're comfortable and they realize, we can all be part of the same business community, we don't have to have this boys club sort of type story, but there's a long way to go. And gender equality in women in business.
How do you work with that inside yourself? You walk into a room, there's 20 or 30 or 70 people, and they're all men, and they all look at you as if to say, what are you doing here? How do you deal with it?
So I suppose it's got easier over the years. But Ruda, what I am is I'm completely authentic. I am an extremely authentic human being, like me or not. I say what it has to be said. There's no sacred cows in the room, especially even with myself. I even call myself out. At the end of the day, I'm extremely firm. I'm extremely fair, but I'm extremely authentic. And the fact of the matter is, again, I have such a deep relationship with people I do business with. And I know people would go to the ends of the earth for me, and as I would for them. And that's what the authenticity is all about.
I once was in an audience where our Auditor General, now our Auditor General, and I'm to my shame, I forget her surname, Takalani is her first name. And someone asked her this question, and she said, I was always better prepared. It was wonderful. Listen, tell me, so you went, Delta became Mara, and that became Grit, and then you listed that Grit in Mauritius. Why Mauritius?
So obviously what we were looking at is we were looking for an offshore structure. Unfortunately, South Africa doesn't give us the opportunity to list in dollars. Exchange control is quite complex. Mauritius has really set itself up as the financial services hub for Africa. So it has really good tax treaties with the balance of the continent. And the financial services sector is really strong in Mauritius. So 5 years ago, I took the very bold decision to uplift our entire team out of South Africa and move them to Mauritius. So I say husbands, wives, dogs, cats, children. And we moved about 20 odd people to Mauritius, which sounds amazingly glamorous, but Mauritius working versus Mauritius holidaying are two different things. So we decided to list in Mauritius just because of the flexibility it gave us to actually transact in Africa. And that was really the decision around Mauritius as a business unit for the balance of the continent.
And then the London Stock Exchange in 2018. Tell me about that decision. What drove you? How difficult was it?
So I look back, and then one of my advisors at the beginning of this process said to me, Bronwyn, if you want to equate listing in London to something, what you must do is you go to the busiest intersection, you take off all your clothes and you stand there naked. And I thought he was absolutely lost his mind, and I didn't know what the hell he was talking about, but it probably was worse than that, actually. Because, one, when you are listing the first Mauritian business, female-led, African real estate story on one of the most governed exchanges in the world, and you come from Africa, so there's just, whether you like it or not, there's just this perception issue that there must be governance issues somewhere along the way. And
so you are absolutely under scrutiny all the time.
Absolutely. And the extent of the due diligence and everything else. So it was one of the most hair-raising experiences of my life, I must say. But why we did it is that we wanted to create a governance bridge to allow developed market investors to come to Africa. So, once having the London stamp of approval, and we've now done the premium, we're sitting on the highest segment in London, as a developed market investor, people want to come to emerging markets. They want to come to Africa, but they don't know how, or they've tried and they've been burnt. So to have that UK governance stamp of approval, which was that conduit. So I see ourselves, Grit, myself, as that bridge, that gap to allow developed market money to come onto the African continent. And it was, it's for me, it is the right place to be for Africa. And, to be able to grow on the scale and the size and attract markets and attract money that comes out of this more developed market, you have to be on an exchange like the UK. And that is why we took the road we did at the time.
And it is, as you say, it's a kind of validation. The due diligence has been done. You can trust us. Give us your money, please.
Absolutely. And it's exactly that, Ruda. I couldn't tell you. I mean, the extent of the due diligence was it was absolutely hair-raising. And, I had a mountain bike accident over exactly the same time. And I was in London on roadshow in a wheelchair. I'd fractured my pelvis. And I always chuckle to this day because maybe those investors just felt so sorry for me. That's why they invested in Grit when we listed on the London Exchange. But it was one of the most hair-raising experiences. But again, for an Africa story, the governance side is so critical. And it's critical that you're able to create a product for the first world that has that governance stamp of approval.
You were the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year for Southern Africa in one of their categories in 2019. What does an accolade like that mean for your company, more than just for yourself?
And I think, really, you hit the nail on the head, because it actually isn't an accolade for myself. It's an accolade for Grit. I rebranded the company Grit some years back. And it really comes down to the guts, resilience, innovation, tenacity. And I always said, you have to be careful what you brand your company, because we live that every day. I always said the grit under your shoes when you're walking across Africa, the grit in the brand. But the acknowledgement and the award for a pioneering business, that there's no other business that's done what we've done, that's listed in the capacity that we have, in a world where there's not many firsts, that a lot of people are doing a whole lot of the same thing. To have an acknowledgement or an accolade for the business, for what we had developed, from going from $100 million 7 years ago to 4 staff to $800 million portfolio today to 120 staff, and still having a listed business, but with such an entrepreneurial spirit and such an entrepreneurial team, it was amazing to be acknowledged. And I was up against some extraordinary candidates. When you walk into a room of that nature and you meet these entrepreneurs and what they've built, and there was an individual who was in his 60s that had built almost an empire. And I remember saying, how do they work between all of these people? Because we were so diverse and everybody had just done extraordinary things. So to be recognized at that level was absolutely amazing.
Plans and dreams for Grit?
So again, I think if my team hears this, they've almost passed out. I think we've only started. It's only just begun, which means that we now have the platform. We have this UK governance platform. And, even in my lifetime, the opportunity in Africa, outside of South Africa, in real estate, because we are so diverse, because we look across different sectors, because we do work with so many different tenants, the diversity is absolutely extraordinary. And the ability to grow now and leverage off this platform it's a huge opportunity going forward.
What was the move like for your family?
So really, it was, I never left South Africa because I was unhappy in South Africa. We left South Africa because it was a business decision. But bringing my 2 girls to Mauritius somewhat 5 years ago has been such an amazing experience for them. I mean, they have 79 nationalities in their school. Mauritius is a bit of a boiling pot. There's a whole lot of people from everywhere that land here for some reason. So the opportunity of diversity, my daughter, when I brought her across, was 4 years old. And they celebrate every religion here, from Hindi to the Muslim festivals to the Christian festivals. And she was so into the Hindi festivals at the age of 4, she actually told me she wanted to convert to Hinduism. And I had to laugh at her because just the diversity was so amazing. So I've got very worldly girls now, and they're probably onto their fourth passports now because they travel all over Africa with me as well. I had the opportunity for them to travel with me. So the experience was actually amazing and continues to be amazing. And the diversity continues to be amazing here. And, you know, it really has opened my eyes and theirs actually, into how big the world actually is, which has been tremendous.
And the physical space, what kind of home did you make for yourself?
So if I could show you my view now, you'd be very jealous because I'm on one of the most beautiful beaches in Mauritius. So, you know, we have a beautiful lifestyle in Mauritius. It really is a beautiful place to come and set up. We've got a beautiful property on the beach, a beautiful piece of real estate, and, you know, and it's safe. So the girls are able to go onto the beach, they're able to water ski, they're able to, you know, really just make use of these beautiful surroundings that we have. And often I have to pinch myself, and especially over this COVID period when people haven't been able to go on holiday and travel, because I have it on my doorstep. So it's always beautiful to come home to Mauritius. I, pre-COVID, traveled extensively. I was out of Mauritius every second week across Africa. And, you know, being able to actually be grounded now with my girls for the last year has actually been a real joy. I know a lot of people have found COVID very difficult, but I've actually found it a bit of a blessing because I've spent 7 years building a business and haven't really seen the family much. So it's been really tremendous to be grounded. So Mauritius is a great place, and it's a great place to operate a business from that perspective.
And how do you answer the question that's always around for women, and that is the balance between work and life and family and all of that?
So I always say to people when they ask me, I don't think it exists because I think that every day is a day that you have to work on being able to spend quality time. And that doesn't just go quality time, relationship, family, but even at the office. So, you know, my view is when you're present, you should always be present. When you're present in the office, you should always be present. When you're home, you should always be present. I've got a teenage daughter now, she's 13. I have the most extraordinary relationship with her because I believe I am that present. I also believe I've raised two very independent children. They're both ready to move out of the home, and they're only 10 and 13. But the fact of the matter is that that's how I've brought them up, and I've been able to allow them to experience a lot of what I do. They're interchangeable with my office. When you go into my office, you'll see my girls sitting there. So they're very much part of Grit, and very much part of what I do, and they celebrate what I do. And it was so amazing. My 10-year-old daughter did a project last year on significant people. And actually somebody in her class chose me. She didn't choose me. And it was such an honor when she came and she said, Mom, so-and-so chose you as a significant person. And I thought, it's so amazing. It's so amazing, especially when we're raising young women that are going to be future leaders. It's amazing when you can lead by example. So for me, the advice to women is, you know what, we just need to do what we need to do and try and keep the guilt to a minimum. And we need to be so present in everything we're doing at that particular time.
And I think the other part of it is to go back to what you said earlier, relationships. You couldn't have your girls at the office if your team members didn't want them there or felt this wasn't right or whatever. There has to be a team that supports you in the way that you see life.
Sure. And Rita, that's another thing. I mean, I've grown the business from 4 of us 7 years ago to over 100, but my core team, I've got an unbelievable team. And the fact of the matter is our Grit brand, people live and breathe the brand. I mean, from literally the branding on their clothing to the branding in our office to everything that we do. But everything we do it with absolute passion, with absolute love. We've got such a family operated business. You know, my COO runs a huge animal sanctuary in Mauritius, and we've either got a stray dog, a stray cat, a stray tortoise, a monkey sitting in the office at some point. And, you know, often she'll be dialed into PwC in the UK and she'll say, okay, well, I'm looking after this rat today or this monkey, and they love it. But they probably think we're running a zoo. But ultimately, it's all about letting people live their own passions, because when they do that, then they love their work. And I've got an extraordinary team. I've gone through an unbelievable sort of personal matter around my divorce over the last 2 years, and I've had my team just rally around me. And sometimes when you step away, you realize how strong your team actually is. because I'm the type of person that when I'm in it, I'm doing everything, but I've had to step away a little bit in the last year. And it's amazing to see the strength of others around me. And again, all relationships, absolutely the heart of our business.
Bronwyn, thank you so much for making time, because it sounds as if you don't have much of that. It was a real pleasure to talk to you, and all of the very best with this amazing pioneering effort.
Thank you, Ruda. It was amazing to talk to you. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Go well. And
thank you.
To the viewers as well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening, for watching. I hope the technicalities were okay on your side, because we did have a few hiccups today. Until the next time, goodbye.